Spill the Chai. I'm Aliya Jasmine here in Los Angeles. We've got Sangita Patel over there in Toronto, Canada, and a very special guest joining us today.
Hi, Kajal. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a loaded question at a time like this, isn't it? It really is, right? Kajal, I'm so glad that you're here today. You are a certified resume strategist and founder of Spark Career, and we're so excited to be able to talk to you right now. The last few episodes that AJ and I have done for Spill the Chai has been focusing on colorism and everything that's happening in the world right now. And it's also opening up the conversation of being a person of color working in an industry where it lacks diversity in most places in the corporate world. We talk about the top tier levels being mostly white, and sometimes it's not figuring out how to speak for those who are of color. And so I'm so glad that you're able to be here with us today, because I think this is the next conversation AJ and I need to have, because a lot of people are talking about this. So I'm going to throw
including us, like our text messages recently have all been about race in the workplace, right? Like Sangita, you and I privately.
Yeah, it's true. And we're, you know what it is? We're learning, but we're also acknowledging at this point. I think all of our lives, we know it's there, but we ignore it. And we think it's okay. We have a job, stay quiet, work hard, and keep going. Why do you have to work harder? And that's the question I have for you today, is because we need to understand what it means to be a person of color and how to own yourself when you're in a company where you're down here, the 1% down here. So in your opinion, right now, at a time like this, do you feel there's a change happening with what's happening in the world?
Yeah, I think that it's exactly what you just said, is companies are being forced to really look at diversity. And it's not just saying that you're pro diversity, and it's not just saying that you're an equal opportunity employer. It's now having to really back that up with metrics. Companies can't just say it anymore. They really should be measuring that and seeing what that really looks like, to make sure that it's not just kind of something you say, but that it's actually being backed up by actual evidence and, being practiced as well.
Before we go on, I just need to make sure that you are legitimately part of this panel. Do you have a chai with you?
Oh, yes, I have a chai with me.
And what's in your teacup? Tell us what's in there.
I have the authentic homemade chai with cloves and cardamom and cinnamon and all the good stuff. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. You are serious. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, that's right. I thought about putting some Baileys in here. I didn't do it, but I did think about it.
Baileys is always welcome. That's basically all that's ever in Sangita's cup. So
I have weird cups too. She calls on me on my weird cups too. This one's just a nice big green one. But yeah, like let's talk.
You have your professional cup. You have your professional cup for the career conversation.
Right? I even wore my Oprah sweater today. I'm like, we're having a real conversation today. But it's me and AJ have been on the phone the last few days, and I think we're finally saying, oh my gosh, this has been going on all of our lives in terms of our careers, and being one of the person of color in our companies, right? So why do you think why does that happen? Why do you think it's that way? Why do you think it's only a few people of color that are working at certain companies?
I think that there's sometimes employers are unsure. You're so used to things being the way they are, they don't want to take the risk. Sometimes they're just trying to reflect what the audience looks like. But in time, like, the audience in Canada has really changed. I was actually I was thinking back to my first memory of what a South Asian woman on TV looked like, and not just on TV, but on the TV that I would consume. Like, I was a huge pop culture fan and a huge entertainment fan. And my first memory is, I don't know, do you guys remember Monica Diol?
Oh, talk about
Civil Electric Circus. And I actually looked into it. That show ended in 1996, and I was like 8 years old. In 1996, I probably shouldn't have been old enough to even know what that was, that show. But to me, that's my first memory. And my next memory isn't until 2006, when AJU started showing up on MTV. So those 10 years, like, for me, that was age 8 to 18. I didn't see someone who looked like me on TV. And so I wanted to ask you guys, like, what was your experience like, and what has your experience been like being South Asian in media? Have you ever felt that you weren't given certain opportunities because of the color of your skin? And have you ever experienced racism or discrimination in your field?
Where do we start? AJ,
oh my goodness.
First.
So I guess it's interesting interesting that you say that because, and Kajal, thank you for the shout out also, because I do feel like it was interesting in 2004, 2006, when I ended up getting my first on-air job. I remember, I had auditioned for so many on-air jobs in Canadian TV. I was a producer at the time. I'd been a producer for a few years. And I remember people constantly saying to me, like, that was the only reference they had for me was Monica Diol. Monica, like, oh, everyone loved Monica Diol. Like, there, and I just remember that being such a big thing, but I also felt like it was such a big obstacle. Like, there was one token brown girl, which was Monica Diol, and everyone would almost put us up against each other, like only room for that one person, when it was ridiculous, because if you do look at the population of Canada, there should have been many of us on the air. And so, and I talk about this all the time, but once I finally got that job and I felt like I was the only South Asian woman in our demographic doing young pop culture youth kind of shows, and not on the news, especially in Toronto. It was interesting because there was this automatic pressure for me to represent all South Asian people. And I almost felt like I had to bury a bit of my ethnicity and bury the fact that I was South Asian to even make it there. To suddenly be this representation it's such a, like, please beep this, but I don't know any other word to describe it except
Yeah.
And like, I just didn't know how to handle that race issue. So it is interesting that you say that. I feel like my skin color has definitely held me back in two different ways. One is, I think, especially when I was working in sports, I was definitely faced with a lot of racism. I think in sports especially, there's a lot of room for respected voices who are white and who are Black, but not for anyone in between. And I think you can talk to a lot of Asian Americans who work here as well, who would probably tell you the same thing. So I definitely felt that there was a misogyny layered with the racism in that world. And then also just being the token, like, it's always just like, if this brown person leaves, there's room for you, but God forbid there's two brown people, and so that really, and I'm just going to give you one example of that in Canada. That's not just an American thing. I know a lot of people in our comments will say that's because you live in Los Angeles, that's because you work in the States now. No, in Toronto, when I was working right after I worked for TSN, you guys know Nabil Karim and Gurdeep Ahluwalia, who are both great, broadcasters in Canada, who are both South Asian. When they were put on the Sports Center desk together at TSN, they got I have never seen Twitter blow up so hard with anti-brown racism. Just kind of, is this Bollywood or is this Sports Center? Like, that's insane.
Wow.
So that's kind of my experience. What about you, Sangita?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I was very ignorant to all of it when I first started in television. I used to be an engineer, and I was brought up in a very diverse culture and community. And then I was exposed to City TV, which was all about diversity. But AJ, you're right. I was replaced because someone else who was Asian left. So they brought me on to cover her shift and become the new weather. And when issues did come up that was Asian related, I had to step up. I remember covering IFA, and they asked me to wear Indian clothes. I'm like, why do I need to wear Indian clothes to cover IFA? I remember it was a weekend day. A reporter had to do a story, and the person was Sri Lankan. He came to me and said, do you speak Tamil? And I just started laughing. I'm like, because I'm brown, you think I speak Tamil? There's little things, and it was interesting to see why, and like things like, you shouldn't wear clothes that color because of the skin color, you should stay away from certain, and it was just all these little microaggression situations that were happening. And what I'm learning is that in the last few days, in the last 24 hours, I've learned that the reasons we stay quiet is to make sure people are happy, and we're scared to lose our job. We are scared to speak up what's right and wrong because we're like, okay, the white folks up there think this is the way it's supposed to be done. They are right. So I'm going to do it that way because I still need my job and this makes sense. But the last few days, I'm learning that I need to stop doing that. Yeah. If you change the way you tell a story, it is more powerful. And I think that's what I think AJ and both of us need to acknowledge now. I think both of us went through for years and years where we said, okay, yeah, this is how it's supposed to be done. This is the way we're going to do it. And I think now we're learning, no, we need to change it. So, I think it's been a struggle in many different ways, but nothing compared to the Black community. But this has really made me realize the importance of diversity. I mean, you cannot have a show where all the writers, all the producers, all the directors, everyone is white, and then talk about issues on air. I'm talking about people behind the scenes. You need diversity there. You cannot have someone speaking about whatever it is, right? If it's about Mahatma Gandhi, you need someone who's actually understanding what Mahatma Gandhi's saying. So anyways, I think there's a big shift that's happening right now. And that's why I'm so happy that you're with us, Kajal, because it's so important. Do you think, I guess the next question for me is, do you think having an Indian name, Sangita Patel, right, Aliya Jasmine, do you think that holds us back when we're applying for jobs?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So there was a joint study done by the Harvard Business School, Stanford University, and the University of Toronto that showed that when candidates whitened their names, so removed traces of their ethnicity from their resumes, they were more likely to get calls for interviews. So in one of the studies that they did, their African American candidates that whitened their resumes were 15% more likely to get a call for an interview. So it's like we can't even say that we think that it's harder. It actually, the research shows that it's harder. And I think the other part of it is that it's not just in employment, or it's not just with getting hired. For me, in my experience, and maybe you guys can relate to this, it's also having an ethnic name, the challenges with that start so early that sometimes you have your own baggage. Like, I'm sometimes hesitant to introduce myself to people because I've had so many experiences of people just like not knowing what I'm saying, or, that prompts that question of like, oh, that's an interesting name. Where are you from? Were you born in Canada? Like these types of questions. So sometimes I'm like, it's a hurdle that I give myself because I'm so used to like it not being received in a way that's positive or favorable. So yeah, I definitely think that there's research to support that having an ethnic name can hold you back. But I also think that sometimes based on your own personal experiences, you can get in your own head about it as well, which can just cause its own set of issues. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think, it's interesting when you're just giving us facts on having an ethnic name, but do you feel like when you're becoming a doctor, an engineer, those common where Asians are usually applying for, do you think that's different? Do you think you have an Asian name is going to actually give you an advantage?
That's a really good question. I don't really even know. I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. I wonder if there's ways in which sometimes it works in your favor. But again, it's like, even then it's like, is it right? It's like associating those stereotypes with those names, like that because you have an Asian name, you're for sure going to be good at math and science. Like that's just all a part of the problem, I think, instead of looking at each individual candidate as, just for their resume and for their experience.
I think also, you could probably make an educated guess that a lot of the institutionalized racism that comes around prejudice towards names has also to do with who is on the executive levels and who is in the hiring process. So when you do look at professions like, for example, engineering, where, like you said, Sangita, for years and years, they're having people who look like us, that also means that at the executive level, there probably are people who look like us. And so maybe there isn't that much discrimination when they see those names because those people exist at higher levels, where in other professional environments like ours, where like, media, and I can only speak, from my own experience, but you do have this tendency where not only is the executive branch of our media companies and the people who greenlight shows and all these things all usually white males or white, but also the people behind the scenes. And I say this so often when I speak at colleges and universities to journalism students, is I know that there is this want and desire to be on camera. And obviously, like, I've done both. I've been on, I still do both. I produce and I'm on camera. But I will say this, that there is this push, even though there aren't a lot of us on air, and we are often token brown people on air, there is a push to fill a diversity quota. For better or worse, there is. And so networks will look for people like us to be on camera. Where there isn't diversity is behind the camera. And that is almost a bigger problem because these are the producers who are writing copy for a lot of the people on air. These are the people who are producing television shows, who are creating ideas, who are shifting narrative. But I'd like to give you one example. On a network I used to work for, another show on the network was a comedy-based show. And one of my friends was a Black female, and she was hosting a segment on that show. And it was a comedy show, and it was called Ghetto Cooking. And she was like making, she was making traditionally what would seem like Black meals and kind of having fun with it. And like I said, it was a comedy show. What bugged me about that show is that although she was Black, the three writers were white males. And I approached our executives about that show, and I said, I feel like this is really inappropriate because, she's obviously out there and she's making these jokes, but they're very racially charged jokes. And I just don't feel like three white males should be writing this script for her. And I was like reprimanded for it. I mean, they really got mad at me. They said that I worked in news and I didn't understand comedy. They told me that, she was in on it. Like she sat there and it was her ideas too. But as we all know, when you are one female of color in a room full of white males and you feel like your job is very disposable, it's hard to speak up in those moments. Whereas if there was one other person of color who, in her case, one Black producer, she might have had the feeling that A, either she could trust what was written, or B, if she was having a problem with it, there was someone she could trust and confide in. And so nothing happened. That segment kept airing. And, I think that is a huge institutionalized issue.
Agree. And Kajal, one of the things, we're talking about entertainment because we're in entertainment, but
yeah,
the fact that you talked about just the name and not getting called back because that's on your resume, for people who are watching who are in every, whatever, field they are, what should they do so they do get that phone call? What should they put on their resume? What should they do with their demo?
I think the best thing you can do, especially if you don't want to do that, and I'm not saying that that's the right way to go, but the best thing you can do is just link your experience to the job as closely as possible. The better your resume looks, like you kind of just have to fall on your experience and trust that that's going to be enough. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that, sorry.
I was just going to say, Sangita, did I ever tell you my story about working at Fox Sports?
No.
So I was hired there as a sports reporter, and they felt like my name was too ethnic, regardless of the fact I've been on television for 20 years. They felt like my name was too ethnic to put it in the key, like the key that shows up on your screen. So they made me go by AJ. And, like my friends call me AJ and I don't mind that, but like that's not my name. That's not my television. Like I want my name on. They like my old boss was a white male and he actually said to me, your name's too ethnic. Our audience won't be able to pronounce it. And I just thought my name's not even that, it's Aliya Jasmine, like Aliya, like the singer, Jasmine, like Aladdin. Like it's very pop culture. Like I think most white people can figure that out. But I just in that moment couldn't believe, like imagine if my name was a little harder to pronounce, a little more ethnic. I don't know. Like, I mean, I feel like this is a real issue that, especially like when you think about naming your kids. Like, did you think about that, Sangita, when you were like naming your children?
Because I talked to my husband, we were out in the backyard talking about it. I go, do we consider like the fact their names will be difficult growing up? And he's like, no, I just love the name Ava. We just loved it because it was simple and they could learn how to spell it right away. But I think deep down for me, I didn't want their names to be complicated because I went through it. Ultimately, that's what it was. I wasn't going to give them a name that was hard to pronounce. I didn't want to give them a name that was that's going to hold them back. So it is interesting. So I think I myself did, not my husband, but I did. I think it was important that they didn't have, like, I've been called Sangita. I mean, one of the executives, I'm one of their faces on television, and he calls me Sangita. And I was just like, dude, I mean, I don't want to be shows.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to ask you guys about this. Like, if you've had the experience of people butchering your name, and then if you hesitate to correct them.
No, I never correct them. I just let it be. I remember this one guy came to do an interview with me, and they're like, hey, Sangita Patel. And he goes, I know how to say your name. Great. I'm like, great. And through the whole interview, he called me, not even Sangita, he butchered it even more. And we just let it be. I'm just like, I'm not even going to correct him. I'm just going to let it. He was so proud that he got it right. Wrong. Sahiga? I can't remember what it was, but my whole studio was just like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening right now. But even that, right? And so interesting because so if you get ethnic names, we're good at it. We can pick up the enunciation of the words. And sometimes some of the white names are, you can't get it right. And they'll call you on it. And I go, you do it the other way around. You try to say one of our names. Okay. It's culturally based, right? This is what we know. So yeah, we go through that all the time, but it's, it's making me really think about like even Shila's name. Shila is an Indian name, but it's not so ethnic that it's out there, right? So
Yeah.
maybe I personally did find names that were, but I love those names. They were beautiful, but I think in the back of my head, I was thinking about that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
I've had there's the butchering that's like understandable. So I've had like Kajal, but I've had butchering to the point of like somebody being like, sorry, what was it? Jamal. I've had somebody call me Nigel. Like sometimes it's just so far off that you like don't even know how to begin to correct them.
Yeah.
But I think it goes back to what you were saying before, Sangita, where also I hesitate to correct people because I don't want to make them uncomfortable,
Exactly.
which I think is part of the problem.
Right? Like, especially like when you're in your boss's office, Sangita, like that's an odd time to be like, you hired me, I'm on your network, and you can't say my name.
Yeah.
It was a funny moment. I'm just like, I really, this is really happening. But it's interesting. Okay. So you're lie about your name. What else should you lie about?
No. I think the most important thing you can do is just, like show up in your qualifications, show up in how, experienced you are. Make sure that you're tailoring your resume as closely to the job as possible. That's like, those are the things that you can do to really win in the recruitment game. So just like when you were talking about like people at the executive leadership team, I just remembered, I think this is like a really interesting story to share. I was working at this company once and we were just about to have a meeting. It was a room full of people. I was the only Indian person in the room. And this man he wasn't the president, but he was part of the executive leadership team. He, like, everybody's in the room and he's like, oh, I have the funniest story to tell you guys. I was just at a networking event last weekend and the 3 people I was sitting beside were named Lovepreet, Suckdeep, and Gagandeep. Isn't that hilarious? And like, I think what it does is, first of all, it's crazy that somebody at a leadership level would say something like that and not understand like how offensive and insensitive it is. But on top of that, I think it just goes to show like these are the uncomfortable situations that first generation Canadians often have to feel, or maybe even beyond that, where you're faced with this decision of like, do you say something because it's like super awkward and you want to make sure that people know that that's wrong, or do you just continue, you just want to assimilate and fit in and you don't want to be the person that's like, causing trouble, or they're one of the leaders of the company, you still want to be seen as favorable for them. And I think it's like similar to when you spoke up, AJ. It's just like it makes it really hard to know what the right thing to do is in those situations.
Yeah. And the truth is, like, again, when we talk about being that token, right? You're feel blessed that you are that token. You are like, I am going to keep this job as long as I can. I will do whatever. If they tell me to suck up, I will suck up. I will do whatever it takes to keep this job. And I think that's the issue here. But one of the things I want to understand, and it kind of drives me nuts, but you know what? It does drive me nuts. When you look at these companies, even corporate companies and our companies in entertainment, the top level people are all white. Top level people are mostly men. And this has been going on forever and ever and ever. I just don't understand why, going back when AJ was on television, when she started her career, why wasn't there a quota to have those tokens at the top tier level? Why hasn't that happened? Is it because it's successful? I'm going to say, is it because things are just great? Having all those white people at the top is just a great way and they're succeeding. Is that the mentality behind it? Because it blows my mind that we're still talking about this in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem is that one of the reasons we don't see more diversity at the top is because a lot of times people of diverse backgrounds don't know that that's available to them. So you might not even be applying for those positions because you just assume that they're not available to you. So, one example here is for me, like I'm not sure what your relationship is with your fans, each of you, but if you find that like your South Asian fan base of especially women are really attached or really extra fangirly, you know, it's not just because you're on TV and it's not just because you produce credible, interesting journalism, but it's because you represent access to an opportunity that would otherwise seem inaccessible to us because we don't see it that much. And I think that that could be translated to kind of these executive leadership positions. It's like if you don't see yourself in that, sometimes you don't feel like that's available to you. So part of the problem is just that we don't see as many applicants, ethnic applicants, for those types of positions. You know, yeah. So, and the other thing is like just thinking about AJ, what you were saying about, you know, there's a lack of diversity in the back end of media. Like what I find interesting about that is that viewers wouldn't even know that. So viewers couldn't demand for a different, you know, it's like you can, when you see it on TV, you can ask for or like write in and demand for a different look or maybe more diversity. But if you don't see it in the back end, like you don't even know to ask for it. So I think sometimes these are the things that happen that kind of keep executive leadership more, you know, homogeneous in that way of just being white and male.
And I think like this is like why it's important that even companies that where their goal is to like sell product to children like Barbie, why it's important for them when their Dr. Barbie is only white and they have like a token black Barbie, but she's just like a regular fashion Barbie and all their like career Barbies are white. Like this is why them making those changes in the last few years where, you know, they have all these different professional Barbies who are of all different colors is important because how do you even imagine as a young brown girl to see yourself as a firefighter if you've never visualized that or played with that, right? Like I think that is a really, really good point. And I think a lot of us, you know, I was just thinking when Sangita was talking, and I think it's also like many of us being first generation Canadians, being the children of refugees and immigrants who feel so lucky that Canada is so inclusive and took us in. And we do feel so lucky to have the jobs that we have. I know my parents taught me the way that their parents taught them, like, know how lucky you are. Always be humble. Always work hard. You have to work hard to them. And so we just want to be there. Like, we're just happy to be there. And we work so hard just to be there. Though I think we take a lot more shit in the workplace than maybe some of our white male colleagues would ever take. We're a lot more apologetic than a lot of our white male colleagues would ever take. And I'm curious to know, Kajal, your opinion on like the idea that, you know, when you hear people in executive positions who are all white, be it in media or even in, you know, the education system or like whatever the company is, well, they'll say it's not that we're not hiring people of color. It's just that we're hiring the best person for the job. What is your response to that, or what's your thought process behind that?
Yeah, I think that's a safe answer. But I think, you know, what's interesting about that is it kind of introduces these biases that we see. So, you know, I'll give you an example. I once worked with a client and we asked them if they were open to international, you know, candidates coming from international backgrounds, like no Canadian experience. And their response was, well, we're open to it, but we don't want that to get in the way of our, you know, we don't want the quality of the candidate to go lower. So somehow there's this association with international experience being associated with a lower quality candidate. And that's, I think, where the problem is that when you, let's say you are submitting a resume and your name is ethnic or your background is international, they may already be making assumptions on like the person's communication skills, or making assumptions on the fact that the person may not have the same, you know, if you're an accountant, the standards might be different from the country you come in, or a lawyer, or whatever it is. So I think the problem with that is it's a really hard thing to measure. So it's a hard thing to call companies out on. But I think when they say like, you know, we're just looking for the best candidate or the best qualified candidate for the job, in that can be all these hidden biases and all these hidden, you know, prejudices.
And don't you think that diversity, like that the fact that you bring diversity to like the C-suite, as they call it, you know, and don't you think that the weight of that one thing should be just as heavy as like 5 or 6 of the other talents that someone might bring to the table? I mean, that is such an important, I just don't think we're weighing that as heavy as it should be.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like, I think it's partly because that's all they know as best, right? It's
Yeah.
redefining what best is, and
Mhm.
changing that definition is so important at this point. And I think that's what it is. And the truth is, some of the qualifications, we know the Black community don't have access to certain kind of education, or everybody there, people of color don't go to do certain program, whatever it is. It's all going to meet it. Where you live or where you come from, that's a whole different discussion. But I think you made a really good point about having someone to recognize doing that job and saying, hey, I can do that job. Hey, I can be at the top. And then when you don't see it, you're like, you don't have that opportunity. And there's this whole thing about having a mentor, someone who can actually stand up for you. If you're applying for a certain job at a top tier level, you need someone to back you up, period. We know that, someone to say, this guy, you need to hire him because he's so great. And that's the problem. So almost
Okay,
like they're
no, then let's be truthful about that. If we're going to bring that up, let's be truthful about that. How many times in the workplace have other South Asian people held South Asian people back? I mean, that's a real thing. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, you're right. But I don't think I've ever had that experience where a South Asian has held me back. It's been more the people of color who supported me when I was at City TV. When I was an engineer, everyone was, of color, but all of our bosses were white. And so you're right. Some of the engineers that were there working with me were brilliant, and they should have been my boss. They were the ones who were making the money. They were the ones who were stepping up and saying, this is how things should be done. But it never happened because you're right. Like, they didn't have someone up there to say, you can actually apply for this job. But I don't know. I've never had that experience, AJ. Maybe you have, or maybe I'm just oblivious to it and believing that people actually cared to support me in the South Asian community.
You've never even heard, like, you're actually oblivious of the fact that that brown people can sometimes be the worst to other brown people. Like, you honestly have never heard that before.
My experience, I don't think I've ever experienced it.
But have you heard about it?
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I personally, I can't talk to it because, or maybe there were certain times that I'm not even realizing it.
Yeah.
I don't. Good question. How about you?
I agree with you. I feel the same way. I've never experienced it personally, but I think that's because, Sangita, you and I at one point were like the only brown girls in Canada.
But made it. You made it.
And so we linked together. I mean, but I think that is a very real thing for a lot of people in a lot of industries. And I think, and like, I'm going to leave this up to the expert to weigh in here, but my assessment up to this point, and I'm so interested to hear what you're going to say, has always been that I think everyone's trying to get a step ahead. And we know that there is only a few token brown people allowed up. And so we're competing with each other for those jobs and we're holding each other down. That's my thought on it. But let me know what you think.
I was going to say the exact same thing. It's just there's so few opportunities, and there is exactly that, the tokenism of like, we just want one Asian candidate to fill this role. So when there's one position and there's 5 candidates that are Asian, it just creates an environment where that can happen, where you are competing against each other. I'm with you guys. I don't know that I have ever seen it happen or experienced it myself, but I believe that it exists because when there's so few opportunities available, sometimes you do have to claw for those positions. So
it might have also generational. Like, I feel like that existed a lot more maybe in our parents' generation. Like, I remember hearing a lot of the stories like more growing up, and I think, I'm really curious what you think about also like the extracurricular activities that I think a lot of people need to do to get ahead. Like, I remember my dad, he spent his childhood escaping genocide, and so he never picked up golf.
Yeah.
And when he's at work, I mean, that's been something that's actually held him back, like he was learning English. And so he, as a Canadian, didn't speak French. And so what a lot of people he worked for would do is they'd go out and they'd play golf and they'd speak French. And like, he just wasn't even invited or included. And it was so hard when he reached a certain level and I hope I have to ask him if he's okay with me saying this, but I think it was really hard for him. And he's done incredible now in his career, but that was a hurdle he had to climb that a lot of other white men never had to climb. So I'm curious, like, what do our viewers do about those kind of, just cultural barriers of entry?
Those are just like, it's really hard to have a solution to those kind of problems. I think it has to kind of start at the employer level. It's like I think it's more the responsibilities on the employer to make sure that you are creating networking opportunities that are more inclusive. So golf is a great example. I've worked in places where, and sometimes it's not even on purpose. Sometimes it's just this natural thing where two male colleagues will start a hockey league, and then one will invite a friend of a friend who happens to be a senior manager, who happens to be, a hiring manager. So sometimes it's not like it's like this intentional thing, but it happens. And I think it's kind of up to employers to really make sure that when you're creating networking opportunities, even if it's not set up as a networking opportunity, to really be like auditing and make sure that these opportunities are available to more people, like to make them as inclusive as possible. I think being colored is one thing. I think being a female is another challenge. Or like if you're playing in a male hockey league, I'm not going to be able to join you, even if I do know how to play, So I mean, it's I think it's more on the responsibility falls on the employers to make sure that they're really making, creating environments where they're a little more inclusive and that people who come from diverse backgrounds feel included. I think the same happens, with that question of like, should candidates whiten their resumes? Again, I feel like it's not even really about it's not the candidate's responsibility. Employers should be making sure that they're doing the work to make sure that these things aren't happening, where they're even like accidentally creating all this bias where it makes it harder for ethnic candidates to get the job. I think one thing that was really interesting about the study that was done by the Harvard Business School is that what they found was it's not just any company. It was like even companies that said that they were pro-diversity were showing discrimination at the same rate. And the challenge with that is that candidates feel safe to show their ethnicity. And it's not that the employer is trying to set up this trap. It's that they want to believe that they're pro-diversity, but inherently they still have these biases. And so the candidate will feel safe to send their ethnic resume in only to be rejected because of their ethnicity. And so, I think the responsibility really falls on the employers, because each candidate is going to have a different experience. There may be ones that do play hockey, but don't, or do play golf, but don't, understand all of the references that come with a certain thing. Like there's always going to be unique experiences. And I think it's kind of up to employers to make sure that they're creating as inclusive of an environment as possible.
I found this online, and it's exactly what you just said, Kajal. Like it was like, and I'm just going to read it here for you. But and I'll just go through it really quick, but it's like, it talks about different major companies. It's a US study, but it talks about the idea of adding diversity to the corporate level and what they call like, can you explain to our viewers what the C-suite means? Everyone's talking about this, and I feel like if you're not in the business world, you don't even know what this means.
Yeah, so a C-suite is just like the senior executive level. So when you have your chief executive officer, your chief operating officer, your CFOs, your chief financial officer, chief technical officer, that kind of. So it's usually the highest level of leadership in a business.
And so it says, for example, so Zoom has 14 C-level executives. It has one Black C-level executive. His title is Chief Diversity Officer. Airbnb has 17 senior leaders. It has one Black senior leader. Her title is Head of Global Diversity and Belonging. Yeah. Charter Communications has 22 senior leaders. It has one Black senior leader. Her title is Chief Diversity Officer. Bank of America has 16 C-level executives. It has one Black C-level executive. Her title is Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Like, should we go on? And it's just, this is so normal. LinkedIn has 0 Black people in the C-suite. Twitter has 2 Black people in the C-suite. Sephora has 0. Gap has 0. Levi's has 0. Disney has 0. Nike has 0. So like, this is an issue. I mean, we are not like, what irritates me is that it feels like all this colonialism has never gone away. It's like white people are controlling the business, and we're all like, all these little brown people are like the worker bees, and like that makes me really mad. I mean, I don't know what the solution is. I don't know how we change that besides calling them out.
Like talk about it blows my mind that we're talking about this now. It's our next generation. My kids should not be dealing with this shit.
Yeah.
They should be. I can apply for this job and I'm not going to get, representative of the diversity group or whatever it was. Like,
yeah, like we're better. Our expertise isn't being diverse. And that's like a huge, that's what makes me so mad. It's like, if you have to have an issue about a person of color, then you bring in a person of color. But if you have an issue about HR or about like the best tech to, use an AI, then we can't be an expert. Like, it's only if it's about brown people shit we can be an expert. Like, that's crazy.
Like, that to me is just like the perfect example of tokenism. It's just like the only colored people you have are the ones that are responsible for diversity. It's just like so crazy that that's the case. Like, the only way you're going to hire a colored person at the C-suite level is for them to take care of diversity and nothing else. It's just like really reflective of the fact that bias still really very much exists in recruitment.
It's gross.
It is.
I wanted to ask, what has your relationship been and your experience been with that question of people saying, like, where are you from? Where are you really from? Were you born in Canada? These types of questions. I really am curious to know if you've had that. I'm sure you have, and how you feel about that question.
I know. I think for me, it's like, oh, you don't have an accent. So what part of India were you born? And I'm like, I was born in Canada. And they're like, no, but like, where's your parents from? I said, I'm born in Canada. Why do you need to know where my parents are from?
Totally.
Like, what does this have to do with anything? And then you answer the question. My parents are from Gujarat. They're from India, and they get first generation Canadians. And that question gets asked a lot. Like, it happens all the time. Or when I'm in LA, people think I'm Spanish, right? So I play with it. I'm like, my name is Sangria at the Four Seasons in LA, and I love it because they take good care of me. And I'm just like, let's just let it be. But yeah, you're so used to that question, so you just answer it. Sometimes it's irritating, but I don't know. It's a question that shouldn't be asked. If I'm in Canada, I live my Canadian life. You can see from my skin tone, I wasn't born, like, not born here, but my family wasn't born here. Like, it's irritating, but I guess it's okay. I don't know.
AJ, what about you?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's never a time that I've ever answered I'm Canadian and haven't been asked, no, but where are you really from?
Yeah.
Like, no one has ever taken you're Canadian for an answer.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to say? Like, oh, my parents were from Africa, but they got their passports taken away, so they're actually from Canada. Like, like even when I say that, like, when I'm like, oh, my parents are from Africa, they're like, from Africa. Oh, but where are you? Like, where were they from? And it's like, why is this? Like, they're 5 generations from Africa. Like, why does it matter? You know what I mean? Like, I just think I think it's more about them feeling like they can, like, I fit into their worldview than it is about actually getting an answer about where I'm from. And like Sangita, I feel like living here, every time I go out for an audition, everyone thinks I'm part of the Latinx community. I mean, it's like they don't even know. They're like,
what is this?
You're what? Yeah.
I have to come up with the last name. It's Sangria something. I got to come up with something else. But the question here is also now, will my kids get that question? Will that generation, will that question be asked? And I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, that question's not going to be asked.
Sorry.
I think there will be a shift. I really do, or at least I believe there's going to be a shift where that question won't be asked to them. And maybe because my parents were first generations to this country, it's that old mentality, and now our generation thinks differently. So maybe there is a change. Yeah.
I hope that it's like, I see a huge generational shift in the question, if your friends get married and they've been married for a few months or a year, like that question of like, when are you going to have babies? Like, I feel like we just kind of know to be really sensitive about that. I hope to see that same sensitivity approached with this question, because it really does, like, I think it depends on the context of the situation, but if I'm like at a networking event and I know that this person's never going to see me again and they're asking me, sometimes it makes me feel like it just makes me feel singled out, and almost like I have to explain why I look different than everybody else there. And I've often wondered, like, if you turned around the question on them and they were not ethnic, wouldn't they find it offensive if I said to them, like, oh, were you born in Canada? Like, they would probably say, like, yeah, of course I was. But that's how I feel. It's just like what makes it different? It's just the only thing is your skin color.
It's so important that we have these conversations. I know, and if everyone that's watching, we want to hear from you. Give us a comment on your thoughts and your experiences to be part of this conversation. Gajal, one of the big things right now, we can't forget COVID, the isolation. We know there's going to be a lot of issues coming out of COVID in terms of, a lot of people are using the word the next depression. It's, we're in a state where it's very difficult for a lot of people who've lost their jobs, or their companies are shutting down, or their businesses are shutting down. What can you say to people going forward once everything opens up in terms of getting employment?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that you can do right now to kind of set yourself up for success as the economy gets to be in a better place. So the first thing that I would recommend is use this time to get some feedback on your resume. So whether that is a professional resume writer or just a friend or family member, what I see all the time is because we write our resumes with our own experience and our own perspective, we sometimes, the gap is bridged in our minds, but it doesn't necessarily translate on your resume. So a good example here would be if somebody had payroll experience, I might ask them, that's great. And, you put that on your resume, that's awesome. But what was the size of the company that you did payroll for? And what system did you use when you ran payroll? Because if a recruiter sees that and you have experience with the size of a company that's similar to them, and you use a system that they use or a similar system, you actually have a better chance of getting a call. So really opening yourself up to the feedback and having people ask, say to them, like, do you have any follow-up questions? Because that's going to be an indication that there may be some more detail that you can add. So that's one thing. The second thing is right now is a really great time. Like, when life is normal, there's not a lot of time to think about progression, where you want to be next, where you see yourself in 5 years, these types of things. So now is a great time to reflect on that and think about or look into, your dream job or your next step from where you are right now. What are the credentials that are needed for those positions? And if you don't have them right now and finances allow it, maybe now is a great time to enroll in some of those courses, enroll in some of those certifications to kind of get you to that next step when things are back up and running again. And another thing is really taking the time now to think about what your transferable skills are. So yes, there have been cuts in a lot of areas, but there's been growth in areas too. So a good example here is if you, retail is an area that's been hit hard. Let's say you were a sales associate for a retail chain. You have customer service experience. And one area where we've seen growth is the need for customer service representatives, especially in the area of tech, because customers have a lot of questions right now about some of the changes that are happening. So customer service is a skill is transferable. And then one thing that I'd recommend is extracting these transferable skills and then putting them on the top portion of your resume so that it's one of the first things recruiters see, because recruiters don't spend a lot of time looking at resumes. So if they just see that you are a sales associate in a retail chain, they may say like, oh, it's not related. But if the first thing they see is the customer service experience, then that work experience just backs up that skill, and they can make that link. So it's almost like doing a bit of the work ahead of time for the recruiter, like doing the work and making it easy for them to draw those connections. And then the last thing I'll just say is when you are applying for jobs, making sure that you're taking the time to really customize your resume and your cover letter to each company. So I always joke that recruitment is a lot like dating, like Tinder. Like, on Tinder, it's like, if you're going on a Tinder date, you know that the person's probably talking to a bunch of other people, but you still want to feel like they're interested in getting to know you. And employers are the exact same. So yeah, they know you're probably applying to other jobs, but they still want to feel like you've taken the time to get to know them and that you're interested in a long-term relationship with them. And the best way to do that is to do the research, go on their website, find and pick out specific things about those companies and draw authentic connections between those and the things, draw authentic connections between those and yourself. So, really showing them what you're interested in and why you're interested in it with those specific companies. So it takes a little bit of research, but it's worth it.
Yeah. How can people get in contact with you?
So I'm available on Instagram at Spark Career Co. And then I also have a website, sparkcareerco.com.
Perfect. Thank you for joining our conversation today. AJ, you look beautiful. You really do. And the dog. Which dog?
I know the foster dog is outside with the neighbor's dog, and they're just barking at each other. That's why my house has become an animal shelter during COVID. But Kajal, thank you so much. I think that is great advice. It was really insightful talking to you about really, really important conversations about race right now, and obviously what's happening in the career market. And I think, if there's one big takeaway for people who are looking for jobs during this hard time, I think that idea of really customizing your resume is something people don't think about. They do one resume and they send it to everybody, and that's really, really great advice. So for all of you guys watching, we would love to hear your comments about these tips and tricks. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe, and if you would rather hear us on the go, we are now available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So please rate and review us on those. Cheers, guys. Happy Spill the
Cheers.
Chai.
Cheers.